All right, now we are recording. It's almost 12:30. So before we get started, I would apologize. I'll let you know, as you may have noticed if you've seen the other videos, without somebody in front of me and without notes, I tend to ramble. Even still, I tend to ramble. So today I have a little set of notes. So you'll see me referring to the screen um, periodically. And that is why I'm doing it, trying to keep myself on track. So it is 12:30. Let's get started. Austin, I'll take some questions and talk to you soon. First, I want to have some reminders. Here we are. We're almost at the middle point of the semester, right? The end of this week will be the midpoint. So I'm going to remind you what I said at the beginning, a very short version of what I said at the beginning. Why are we here? Or why are you here? Why get a bachelor's degree as opposed to like a trade degree? You know, the trade degree is great. I mean, they're both great. And many people think that sometimes getting a degree, whether it be a trade or bachelor's degree, whatever, is meant to get you a job. And in some cases, in almost all cases, that is the point, right? But for a bachelor's degree, it's a little bit more than that. Hopefully you're here getting a well-rounded education, because as a college-educated citizen, you should be able to think for yourself, whether it's talking about politics or history or, as a consumer, as a voter, as a jury member, whatever it may be. The point here is you're supposed to think for yourself. And on that note, this is why you have to take a couple of science courses. And the one you happen to be taking is environmental science. So here, this is part of your broad education, right? So you can think for yourself, but in this case, specifically about environmental issues. And by no means are you going to be an expert on environmental issues after taking this course, but it gives you that foundation. It gives you just enough information where if there is something that you're interested in, you can go off and do your own research or look into things, and you won't be starting from ground zero. So that's the point. Let me go back to my notes here, making sure I'm hitting everything. And that being said, and I didn't mention this on the first meeting or during the first meeting, but let's talk about what the book says. So why is environmental biology even important? Who cares about it, right? Who cares about the environment? And your book points out quite a few reasons. Money is one of them, which often goes hand in hand with ecosystem services. If you think about the fact that we have pollinators that pollinate crops, right? Imagine if there were no pollinators pollinating crops, and imagine instead you had to pay humans to go out there with little paintbrushes and go from flower to flower. That would be very expensive. And even the hedonic ecosystem services, meaning that, for example, a cabin in the mountains might be worth more if it has a very pretty view of the ecosystem. So those are some of the reasons your book talked about. Money, ecosystem services. We even talked about the idea of intrinsic value, right? So for some people, the environment is important simply because it exists, right? Oh, this is the environment. This is that tree. It exists, therefore it's important, right? All these reasons. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, the most important aspect of this course, the most important aspect about the environment is simply sustainability, right? It's all about survival. And you learned all about that, I believe, in chapter 1. But the idea here is forget about the money and the ecosystem services. At the end of the day, we humans just need to survive, right? And that's why the environment is important. And that's why we need to understand how to interact with the environment, right? How do we as humans get what we need from the environment? That's sustainability, right? We get stuff from the environment, but the whole idea of sustainability is we can continue to get stuff from the environment. So that's why this is important. And that was just a quick reminder since we're here at the middle of the semester. So let me delete that from my notes lists. Again, I'm just trying to keep track of where I'm at. So Pac, did you have any questions about that in general, or any statements about what the course is about, or a bachelor's degree in general? Any insight to specifically why you're here, anything like that?
I mean, not particularly anything that I didn't say on the first video when we talked about this stuff. I read this once, and since you mentioned bees, and since you teach a biology class, it made me think maybe you know about it. I read once that honeybees are actually invasive to the United States, even though they actually play a really important role. Because they came over with Europeans because they were originally African.
Right. To the best of my knowledge, without looking it up, and to keep it short, I won't look it up. To the best of my knowledge, I think honeybees, I could be wrong on this. I think that might be not necessarily species, but a genus. But I do know that some of them are invasive. So
Right.
yeah, now I'm curious, and when I get a chance after this video, I'm going to look that up. These are things that you brain dump things, like you learn something, and if you don't use it for a while, you forget it. So yeah. I'm going to look into that. But yes, definitely, I know there are definitely some invasive species, and that brings up another point too. You have to wonder. Generally speaking, an invasive species obviously comes from a different area, but it's not simply invasive just because it's been introduced. For example, if you take a crocodile and put it in Alaska and say, hey, go free, that's not an invasive species. Yeah, it's not from there, but it's not going to survive, first of all, right? So for that reason, it's not invasive. But then depending on your definitions of where you read, a lot of times it's invasive if it causes harm. So if it's not from the area, but it's not causing harm, then by some definitions, I don't know if you would consider that invasive. Great question. I'd like to circle back to that some other time, maybe later in the semester when we discuss agriculture, and then we can really dive into it. And between now and then, I can refresh myself. Anything else in general before we jump into the specifics?
Nothing that, like I said, nothing that I didn't say in the first meeting.
All right. Let me refer back to my notes. The next thing we're going to talk about is the discussion. Discussion last week and the week before that, it kind of centers around human population growth. So a few things I want to mention about that before we actually have a discussion. Okay. I hate to say, no, I don't hate to say, I'm not going to say, I don't like to use the word or the term human population problem, because the word problem is kind of an opinion, right? You might think it's a problem, someone else might not. So I don't want to use the word problem, but at the end of the day, it's very basic and easy to see that humans just aren't good for the environment, right? Now, that doesn't mean we should get rid of humans. Obviously not, because going back to what I said earlier, the most important thing about this course, in my opinion, the most important thing about the environment, in my opinion, is this idea of sustainability, right? We need to sustain humans. Therefore, if we just eliminate humans or eliminate everything that we enjoy, that defeats the purpose, right? So we want to enjoy life, but we also want to have that sustainability. So that basic concept right there should be always in the back of your mind when we're having these discussions. Simply put, humans are just bad for the environment. Now, granted, there are different levels because, some people might be great for the environment because they might have a really small carbon footprint and might be a huge advocate. And because they're a huge advocate, they have a lot of followers who do a lot of things for the environment. You could go on and on about that. But generally speaking, everything we do disrupts the natural way of things. And that's generally speaking a bad thing. So that being said, then you need to consider this idea of human population growth. And some of the biggest mistakes I've seen in the past 2 weeks, and I see this all the time, and I see this in social media amongst my friends. A lot of times when you try to have this discussion about human population growth, people immediately jump to conclusions and think you're talking about, one of two things, which are kind of related. One, that you're talking about reducing the human population. Now, reducing the human population is different than reducing the human population growth, right? To put it with it under the context of maybe, I don't know, a bank account. If you're talking about reducing the human population, that would be the same as, all right, you have $100,000 in your bank account. Now let's reduce it to, 800,000, or excuse me, 80,000, right? That would be reducing the amount of money you have. Reducing human population growth, using that analogy, would be like saying, all right, we're going to keep the same amount of money we have. We're not talking about taking away money from our bank account, but instead of depositing $1,000 a month, we're only going to deposit $900 a month, right? If you're talking about reducing the human population growth. So there's a difference between reducing the human population and reducing the human population growth. That's one of the biggest mistakes. And the other big mistake I saw, I guess there's three. Okay, so the second big mistake I saw was people often equate this with population control. So again, let's focus on the fact, forget the whole idea of reducing the population. Now we're talking about reducing human population growth. People think that's population control. And very often it is, as people pointed out. China's a great example of that. But it doesn't have to be that. And I gave some great examples. Some of the students gave some great examples, and the book gave some great examples. How do I put this without getting too opinionated? Because I don't like to put out opinions. All right, well, you could basically boil down, this is very basic, very Cliff Notes. Politically, if you were to look at the left versus the right, I think it's safe to say the left wants more government involvement. The right wants left. Generally speaking, there are exceptions to that rule. Now, there is a happy medium then if you're talking about population growth, assuming you want to reduce it. And I gave some examples of that too on the discussion, meaning you could have less government involvement in our everyday lives, and that would actually lead to a decrease in human population growth, right? So, for example, if you were to get rid of tax incentives, and I'm not saying I approve or disapprove of any of these things, but if you were to get rid of tax incentives for having children, if you were to get rid of free education for children, if you were to get rid of WIC, all these things that might incentivize people to have children, if you were to get rid of them, that would be less government interference and influencing the population growth. So there's that to keep in mind. Well, some of the other things I saw. So yeah, it's not necessarily about population growth, or excuse me, about population control. The idea here is that, I mean, yes, that could be, but what are some other ways you could influence it if you want? Another thing, and I don't, off the top of my head, I don't think anyone addressed this point, and I was hoping somebody would, and I didn't want to say it until now, because I was hoping a student would say it. But regarding population growth, human population growth, the United States and most industrialized nations, we don't necessarily have a problem with human population growth, right? The number of humans that we are adding generation after generation is under control, right? And I don't think many people address that. So as far as America is concerned, in my opinion, we're doing pretty good, right? We're not putting out a bunch of people. And that brings me back to IPAT. So if you remember IPAT, that's the equation where we talked about the population's influence on the environment, basically. And it's not just about the number of humans. It's also about the T in IPAT is technology, and the A is affluence, right? So the more money people have as a society, generally, the more resources they use. So again, that was not addressed, at least not a lot in the discussion. So America, generally speaking, does not have a numbers problem when it comes to humans. Generally speaking, it's just a usage problem, right? How many resources we use. Let me refer to my notes, make sure I'm hitting all these things. Talked about that, talked about the IPAT equation. Okay, and I'm almost ready to discuss with you. Sorry, right now you're just listening to me. The next thing I saw a lot of people a lot of mistakes on were the fact that we are talking about worldwide population growth, right? This is an environmental biology class, meaning, yes, we're going to worry about other aspects like the environment, or excuse me, the economy, personal liberties, things like that. They have to be accounted for. But in an environmental biology class, we need to discuss the environmental impacts. So many people talked about how the West Virginia population is declining and how that's bad for the economy and what we could do to help the economy and bring people back. And that's a great discussion to have. But for the sake of grading, it's not, unless you talk about the issue of human population growth. I hope that makes sense. So I saw that mistake a lot.
Yeah, that was me.
Yes.
That was me that said that.
Oh, it was more. No, it was quite a bit. It was more than just you. I wouldn't remember it. I don't think I would remember it if it was just one student. It's a prevalent problem, and it's every semester. So yeah, make sure from here moving forward, no matter what we talk about, yes, look at all those other issues, right? Talk about the economy and personal freedoms and things like that. But also keep in mind that this is an environmental biology course. So make sure that all your discussions at least mention that and focus on that. So yeah, like I said, for the sake of this discussion, those were great discussions because yeah, that is something we need to worry about. And I was hoping somebody could have brought the two together. Like you might say something like, all right, really quickly, going back to this idea of sustainability, your book got a little bit more specific. So sustainability isn't just being able to survive, right? And constantly have enough resources. You're taking enough only, where it can replenish itself, right? That's basically sustainability. But then your book also talks about, I think it was ethical sustainability, the idea of, how much are you using versus how much other people are using. And your book gets more specific about that, but I don't. So if you were going to talk about the human population problem, and again, I hate to use that word problem for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to use it. You could mention something like, well, we have too many humans over here, and West Virginia has a population declining problem. So why don't we see if we can move these people over here? That would be a really long discussion trying to justify that economically and environmentally, but at least it's something somebody could have brought up. So let me refer back to my notes, but I think those were all the big problems I saw. Yeah. The idea of worldwide, not just West Virginia. And again, the idea of environmental impacts, not just economical and things like that. So that being said, what was your idea? And I know you just said it had something to do with that, and that's fine. Here we are, we're just discussing, so it's okay if you don't meet that criteria. What was your discussion
I'm trying to remember. I think mine just focused on West Virginia's lower population and bringing in like immigrants and stuff.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly what I said.
That's
but
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your idea was then, you were focused on the fact that West Virginia has a declining population.
Right.
Maybe bringing other people back here. That's a good one. Do you remember how, like, what your ideas may have been to do that?
I'm clicking on it right now.
Okay. And it's okay. It doesn't have to be verbatim in your head. If you come up with a different idea, like, oh, this would be how we could do it, or this would be an advantage, or this would be a disadvantage.
I took it from the issue that there's like business owners can't find people to work. Mm-hmm. And I added some studies for that. And then my recommendation was more immigration, and then to make parenthood less intimidating to the native population. So I said increasing paternal and maternal leave. That's what I said.
Interesting, because this is a great time to point this out, and I want to say it while I'm verbally saying it, so no one misunderstands me if I type it in a discussion. So your idea, I personally, and this is an opinion, so who cares about opinions? But my opinion is I like your idea. For the sake of parents, it would be good to do that for parents. But if we're going to zero in and focus on population growth, then you would say, well, that's not a good idea for population growth, because that'll probably have people, want to have more kids. But like you said, if you're wanting more people, then that is a great idea. Mm-hmm. And again, like I said earlier, the United States of America does not necessarily have a numbers problem. It's a resource usage problem. And West Virginia clearly does not have too many humans, right? Like you said, they are moving. So yeah, these are all great things to consider. And the only reason people would have ever lost points, again, is if they didn't actually address the environmental issue, because it is an environmental class. So say whatever you want, go whichever direction you want, but at least recognize the environmental issues. And this will be important a little bit later, because you'll have some more opinionated discussions in the semester. And it's important, and this is a really big take-home message I want people to get from this course, is you can be against something and still recognize the value and the argument for it. For example, you might be completely against some of the things that people are doing or requiring for, climate change, right? There's this law, there's that law, there's this regulation, there's that regulation. You might be against that, and that's okay, but you should still be able to recognize, well, okay, this is an issue, and here's, and yes, that would address it. Or COVID, for example, like you might be against, vaccine mandates, things like that. And again, I won't even offer an opinion. But even though you're against them, that doesn't mean they don't help. So I see these weird arguments where they're saying, well, they're focusing on the wrong thing. Instead of saying, look, this is an infringement on our rights, they're focusing, well, it doesn't even work. But yeah, they do work. So just focus on what you need to focus on. You can recognize the good in the other side. You don't have to agree with the other side's conclusions, but you can agree with their different arguments, if that makes sense. So anyway, did you have anything else about the discussion?
No, not that one.
Oh, did you have another one? Did you have questions?
Well, there's discussion 4. I would have to look though. I know I completed it today, but I'd have to look and see how. I'd submitted it like just a few minutes before we started this video.
Okay,
so
I think I may have seen it.
Okay, yeah, it was. I don't think I had many questions about that necessarily though. I think.
Okay.
I think I understood it, which that doesn't mean a lot, but.
Okay. Well, while you're looking it up, I'll say this too. This is another common mistake I'll see on Module 4 discussion. Make sure, like, this is really supposed to be like you're writing a letter to some legislative person. So you want to be persuasive. You don't want to just say, biodiversity is good, and this is why, in like one sentence, right? You want to sell them. Like, why is this an important issue? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, basically, I just took it where it had to do with biodiversity. I just took it and said that essentially I just suggested that they reintroduce red wolves.
That's right. Yeah. I remember now.
And so that was, that's the route I took.
Yeah,
I didn't
I
know.
remember that was a good one too, because I remember what I liked about yours. Also, you mentioned how the elks, that was pretty successful. So you talked
Yeah.
about that, and you also had a portion where you described not just what biodiversity is, but why it's important.
Right.
And then next week, when we have the Module 4 review, I'll talk in more detail and give some analogies about why biodiversity is important. But for now, I'll just let people learn on their own.
Okay.
So good question, and I'm glad we cleared that up. So yeah, make sure if anybody's watching this video, when you do your submission for the discussion, make sure you talk about environmental issues. Make sure you try to sell the senator or the representative, whoever it may be. You're trying to express to them why this is an important issue and also why your idea is so good. Like really try to put your mindset or put yourself into the mindset where you are literally you're going to write to a legislator. Because in the real world situation, if you were going to do that, generally speaking, you wouldn't just like write a couple sentences. I think we should legalize abortion, or I think we should make abortion legal, whichever one you want. And then just leave it at that, right? You would try to sell them on it. You give us statistics and this and that, right? You would try to sell them on it. And I was hoping that's what people would do here. That being said, as long as you meet the bare minimum, you'll probably only lose like 1 point if you don't like try to sell it. So that's still an A, right? You can still get an A, but if you're going to get like 100% A, I want people to actually do more than write one sentence for each thing. Yep, here's the definition. This is why it's important, like one sentence each, right? Sell it. All right. Let me go back to my notes. So we're done. Oh, yeah. I'm glad I checked my notes. I'll remind everybody, make sure you do everything on time. We're talking about the discussions right now, but make sure you do everything on time. If it's late, the official syllabus statement is that if it's late, it will receive 0 points. I am being a little bit lenient on that for COVID reasons, but at the very least, you're going to lose points. So make sure it's on time. And also, the earlier, the better. I know some people don't like feedback. Some people do love feedback. But the earlier you get things done, the more likely I'll be able to give you individual feedback. What you might not know, I don't remember if I've said this throughout the semester, but attendance is due on Monday at noon. And the way we do attendance online is it's based off of your assignments. Did you do this one? 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 Right? So there's 4 assignments or 3, depending on the week. So that means when everybody turns everything in on Sunday night, I'm in a rush. I have to get all this done, everything graded, because I have to put in grade or attendance Monday. So if you're into feedback, the earlier the better. Plus, as some of you might know, and I think Austin, you might know, if you get it done really early and I give you feedback, then you can correct any mistakes you made for full credit. So the earlier the better. And then one final example on that is the first discussion I read today, which I believe was the first discussion for Module 4. The student didn't have exactly what I was looking for, going back to the idea of trying to sell it to the legislator. But because they were the first one to post it, I gave them full credit. And then I just posted as a comment, it's like, hey, for anyone else reading this, make sure you go into more detail about why this is a good idea or why biodiversity is important. All right. So I think that's it for the discussion. Let's talk about lab. All right. Well, actually, before I talk about it, let's change the format here. Instead of me talking and then answering questions, maybe I'll take your questions and then talk about it. Do you have any questions about the lab?
Are we talking about lab 3 or lab 4?
We'll start with lab 3.
Okay.
Completed.
Let me. I don't think I had any questions necessarily, but I did notice I did get a grade, 1 point or 2 points deducted only because I think I answered something wrong. But now looking back at it, I see why I answered it wrong. I just misunderstood it.
Okay.
1 second, and I'll open it up because what I usually do is I'll delete them after when I'm not using them, just so they don't take up space.
Yep, I do the same thing, or file them away. That's what I do. And while you're looking, this is a good time to remind anybody watching the video, you can speed up the videos. You don't have to watch it at normal speed. You can make it, 1.25 the speed, 1.5, 1.75, and twice the speed. So you can speed things up. At the beginning of the video, somewhere around here or here on the screen, there's a little button that shows you. You can click and it shows you how to speed things up.
Okay.
And also while you're pulling up, I'll say this. The most common mistake I saw for 1 point being missed was the graph title or the chart title. The chart title or graph title should always be enough information where anybody seeing it out of context should understand what it was. So usually people would put something like GHA, but it should say, your GHA, because it's specific to you. But that's only 1 point. You would still get an A. I'm nitpicky because you can still get a great grade because I'm going to take off a little bit of a small amount of points, plus you're allowed to fix your mistakes. So that's why.
So on question 21, I misunderstood it because it said, thinking about the questions used to calculate your ecological footprint, can you name one thing that should be made illegal and or regulated? And I came at it from the point of tobacco should be made illegal. It's just because it takes up so much land that could be used for more resources, and that would mean that the footprint would be less because we'd have more resources.
Yep.
But I don't think I explained that very well as to why that it would make a footprint less.
If I remember reading that. And unless I'm wrong, and if I am wrong, let me know, because the websites are always updating. That was a great idea. That was great. And again, you only lost 1 point for that. And the thing is, other people lost points for something similar. That question 21 has to be based on the questions from the calculator. So unless the calculator asked about tobacco use, then it wasn't relevant.
Okay. Yeah, that's
specifically for grading. Again, that was a great idea.
Right.
But
that's all I could really come up with. That's why I used it.
Well, this is a good way to segue into what I was going to say anyway. One of the main issues I see with that question, or with the answers to that question, is people get this this idea of, well, if they're against it, they're so against it that they're blinded to what the question is really asking. Is that we're not necessarily talking about making everything illegal, right? So, say for example, if you agree that car manufacturers should have to meet some sort of emissions standards for their vehicles, which I think, and I would assume most people agree with that, then that would be something you could list on question 21. This is something that I agree with that should remain regulated, right? That's not saying that, I don't know, people focus in on this idea of government control. So I've seen answers where I don't think the government should regulate what people are eating. I'm like, okay, I don't either. That was just one of the many options, right? Pick all the questions and then mention something. So people, again, they get hyper-focused on what they've got their side, and they get hyper-focused on that and miss the big picture. And I'm not trying to push any agenda because it's left or right. I just don't like people getting hyper-focused and missing the big picture. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So that was one of the big ones. Yeah.
I don't even think tobacco should be illegal. That's just what I came up with.
Right. I don't either. I mean, it's horrible, but if you want to do it, you're not. I mean, other than secondhand smoke, you're not hurting anybody. And
yeah,
but that was an interesting way you went with that. I've never really considered it that way. So yeah, that is interesting. But yeah, that was one of the reasons a lot of people miss that. What's another one? Again, this whole idea of I put illegal / and or regulated. It was meant to be together. So if you said something like, I don't think any of this should be illegal, well, that's not exactly what the question was asking. We're also talking about regulation, right? So don't be hyper-focused on the details and miss the big picture. So that addresses both of those questions, the keep it legal, unregulated, and the make it regulated and or illegal. So that focuses on both. What are some of the other mistakes? Let me refer to my notes here. World average, accuracy, convenience, blah, 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 multiplier, delete jump chart, do it. Yeah, so I think that addresses most of the problems I saw in that. I hope. I wish there was more people here so they could tell me what it is they put.
I know another one you mentioned is I got the GHA. I misunderstood what that meant.
Okay. Oh, and actually, that's a perfect segue into that. This is where I was going to start with talking about the lab. Before we specifically talked about the questions on the lab, I wanted to talk about this whole idea of what an ecological footprint is. And you've already watched the video, so I'm just going to give a very basic, not even completely accurate because it's so basic, description. So just imagine everything you need to live. Imagine instead of it being, the tree was cut down in Brazil, and then the furniture was made in China, and then it was shipped to you, or whatever it is, right? Imagine everything you need in your life is done and made and produced on your property, right? I mean, everything, all the food you eat, even the electricity you use. Imagine if you're from here, you know what I'm saying, John Amos power plant, right? So obviously you don't need a power plant that big, but imagine if you had your own little your own little coal-fired power plant and your own little coal mine. Again, all your food, all the trees that it takes to build your house, all the cotton it takes to make your clothes, everything. Imagine all that on your property. How big would your property have to be? Right. And also a landfill, right? You would need a landfill, things like that. That's basically what it is, right? So when you're talking about your GHA, the video that I shared has a better, more accurate description, but a good rule of thumb, a good basic way to think about it really is just how much land do you need to sustain yourself? That's it. Or I guess also not just land, but when you think about food, you could also talk about your own little ocean, right? How much ocean do you need? So those are just things. That's what it means. So keep that in the back of your mind. Of course, it's too late now because you've already done the lab. But as you reflect back on the lab, keep in mind that that's what we're talking about. So did you have any questions then about GHA?
No, I think I took it as only like how much land to produce the food I need, when I should have taken it as how much land to produce everything I need.
Right. And that makes sense though, because in my mind too, when I first think about it, when you think of land, that's what you would usually think of, like, farmland, right? And that is, again, like you said, that is a part of it. So yeah, it is everything, including that. So I think a lot of people make that mistake. And then one person, I think, also they kind of took it the opposite way. Somehow they thought that your GHA, instead of it being how much land you require, I think they took it as how much land you're worth, almost like how many resources are you putting out there? Because the way they answered the question, they said something about like, I think I'll have a higher GHA because I don't use many resources. And that's backwards. I just want to clear that up for anybody watching this video, right? So if you use a lot of resources, the more resources, how do I put it? Yeah, the more resources you use, the larger your GHA will be, right? The more land you need. But anyway, let's talk about some other things for the lab very quickly. Some mistakes I saw. Okay. First of all, the first two questions after the video thing, the hypotheses. What you should know from the video and from your textbook is that America's ecological footprint on average is larger than the world average, right? So I did see a few people miss that question, because if you said that your footprint was, I don't know, let's say the same as the world average, then that would mean in all actuality, it would be much lower than the US average, right? So if you said your footprint was the same as the world average, but more than the US average, then that would be wrong, right? Does that make sense? Or for example, if you said that your, let's just put it that way, right? If your two answers didn't reflect the fact that the US average is higher than the world average, then you would have missed 1 point for those two questions combined. So I did see that mistake occasionally. I always see that historically. And people didn't lose points for this, but here's something to think about. If you say, and some people did say this, that they think their ecological footprint was smaller than the world average, right? And then they had to reflect on the overshoot day and how many Earths that would need to sustain them. And if I remember correctly, I know for sure that the video discusses the overshoot day. So you knew what it was years prior, and the question actually reflects that. And I think you also know, generally speaking, how many Earths we would need based on the world average. That being said, and no one lost points for this, but it's something to think about. If you think your average was lower than the world average, then it would make sense that your Earth overshoot day would be after August, whatever it was, right? It would be after, because if you're saying you use fewer resources than the average person, then it should be an improvement. Likewise, if you did say that you think you use, your footprint is larger than average, then your answer should have reflected that, right? If you think it was larger, then your Earth Overshoot Day should have been earlier. And a lot of people miss that. Not the points. I didn't take away points for that. But it should have reflected that. Same with the Earth, how many Earths you need. So if you think you're using more than the average person, then you should be using more Earths than was reflected in that video. That being said, the number of Earths thing, people were pretty accurate on that one. What they weren't accurate with was this whole Earth Overshoot Day. And I want to make sure people understand what that means too. Let's again put it in the context, or let's use an analogy of a bank account. What we're saying with the Earth Overshoot Day, let's just say it was August 1st. I don't remember the exact date because I've used quite a few years as an example. So let's just say it's August, right? The Earth Overshoot Day has been August. What that means is the Earth puts out X amount of resources a year, right? Let's just call it X. That's how much it puts out in a year. What we're saying is that by August, humans on Earth, all of us together, have used more resources than the Earth can put out by August, right? Than they can put out in a year. And that might be a little bit confusing unless you think about it, because you might say, well, how's that possible? How are we using more than it's putting out? That's impossible because, we would need something to consume. And the best way I can try to explain it is, again, think of a bank account. Let's say you have, $100,000 in the bank account, but you're still, that's your bank account, but you also still have income. You make $25,000 a year. What we're saying is that by August, you had already spent the $25,000 a year that you're going to make that year, right? You'd already spent the $25,000 that you were going to make that year by August. That means by then you're dipping into your savings. Does that make sense? I hope so. What I'm saying is, by August, we had used everything that the Earth produced in a year. But the reason we all didn't die is because, for millions of years, the Earth has produced a lot. So we have resources. We have a savings account, so to speak. So every year, once we go past that overshoot day, we deplete the savings account, so to speak. And that's, first of all, why that's such an important topic. And two, I just wanted to clear that up. I don't think people truly understand what the overshoot day is. Did you have any questions about the overshoot day?
This actually wasn't on there, but I just thought of this just now. Do you think a country that was isolated, like was more isolated than others, like Cuba or North Korea, would have their own overshoot day?
Yes.
Yeah, because like America and most other countries, there's so much trade you couldn't really single out one country. But then like there's some places like if you had this certain piece of land and they only use the resources on that land that they could grow or create on that land, then wouldn't they have their own overshoot day?
Yes. Yes, and that's a great question. Yes, they would. And if I remember correctly, that website, if you really dive into it, not just the basics that were required for the lab, it gives a lot of data. And I think they do have things like that. The biocapacity of each country, the overshoot day of each country, the average GHA of each country. Yeah, it's all there. And that's a great point. And it's something worth looking into if you're interested. And of course, obviously, you yourself have your own Earth Overshoot Day after doing the calculator, which is a good time to bring this up because somebody, I was grading this, one person just seemed pissed. They were just mad. Like, this is not accurate. This is just trying to scare you. And, I partially agree. First of all, it's not that accurate because if it was extremely accurate, you would have many, many, many more questions, right? So you have to balance like convenience of, hey, let me go in there and take a quick quiz and get some results versus accuracy, right? The more to get more accurate, you would need many more questions. Not like, oh, how much trash do you use produce compared to your neighbors? It would be more specific. Like how many pounds of trash do you produce a week? And what was your, insert your power bills from the last 5 years, right? So the person was correct. It's not as accurate as it could be. And I'm sure, I don't know this, but I would assume that yes, it does err on the side of trying to scare you a little bit. But that doesn't completely negate the results. You know what I mean? Like it does show if you use a lot of resources, you do. And that person and other people, sometimes that seems to blow their mind. Like, there's no way I use that much, compared to the world. But think about what a lot of people in the world have. Most people don't have anything. A lot of people don't have houses. And that sounds crazy, but a lot of people live in huts, things like that. No houses, no running water, no electricity, no vehicles, right? So we're just so used to what we live in To us, this seems normal. Like before I was a student, I wouldn't have thought I was living in luxury, and I still don't really. But when you compare it to what a majority of the humans on Earth have, apparently I'm living it up. So anyway, that's just something to consider. Let me refer back to my notes here. Okay, I talked about the world average versus the overshoot day. Yeah. So delete that. Accuracy versus convenience. Talked about that. Regulation versus making something illegal. Again, you might think, going back to the questions on the calculator, none of that should be made illegal. You should be able to drive as much as you want. You should be able to fly as much as you want. You should be able to have a house as big as you want, made out of whatever you want. And in my opinion, we're talking about opinions, I would agree with all that. That's my opinion. But that's different than being regulated, right? Regulated might be something, again, like I said, where the government says, look, car producer, if you're going to produce cars, you need to meet these emission standards, right? You can't pollute too much. That's as far as the ethical discussion about the lab and talking about the implications of the carbon footprint, or ecological footprint. That's all I have to say about that. Now, if we're going to get more nitty gritty and talking about grades themselves, a lot of people miss questions or missed points, not many, but a few points, because some of these were multi-part questions. And I see this every time. It might say, was your hypothesis correct? How many Earths do we need? Was your hypothesis correct? What was your overshoot day, right? Those are two-part questions. So a lot of times people would miss points simply because they just didn't answer the whole question. Another common mistake I saw in this lab, and I mentioned it earlier, so I'm going to say it very quickly now. Anytime you have a graph, it should make sense out of context. I know what it means because I wrote the lab and I just read your lab. But if you were to take that graph and show it to somebody out and they've never seen the lab, they should know what it means. So in this case, for lab 3, it should say, your title should say something like, my GHA consumption categories, right? It should include that. Hopefully that makes sense. Another thing, like I said, with a discussion, make sure you do it on time. The earlier, the better, because you can actually get more feedback from me and you have more time to fix your mistakes. And then finally, make sure you save your files as PDFs before you upload them. I know that sounds nitpicky, but it's for a reason. Things get lost in translation if you save it, or if you don't save it as a PDF before you upload it. Sometimes things just go completely missing, in which case you'll miss points, not because you missed it, just because it got lost when you uploaded it. So I believe that is all I have for this week. Did you have any questions about next week's lab?
I did. I actually just started.
This one's pretty straightforward.
So my question is, like, I don't actually need an answer or anything. I know that we can't do that, obviously, but okay. So it on the step 1, it says, imagine the ecosystem is newly forming. The previous ecosystem has been destroyed by fire or flood, and the first colonizers of the successive ecosystem are producers. Given the 2 fictitious species of land in the simulator, predict what will happen in this young system and record your prediction in table 1. Then use the simulator found at the website. By default, the settings are how you need them. Plant A and plant B on. Now run the simulator 100 to 100 time steps and record the population numbers for both plants. So when I look at the question 1, table 1, the prediction, is there anything we should base that off of, or is it just something we just think?
Just something you can think, yeah. Just something you think, and you'll never get it wrong. You can predict whatever you want. The only time you would ever miss any points for a prediction would be if, like, you'll see later on, it says there's a question that says, "Was your prediction correct?" And then I'll just look back. If you say it was, and then I look back and it wasn't, then you'll lose a point. Well, or if you say no, my prediction was not correct, and I look back and it was correct, then you will lose a point.
At this point, with the information we have, though, we don't really. Should I know why I'm predicting that?
Nah.
No, not really. Okay.
No. The only reason, since you're asking, the only reason that question's even there is because of that reflection thing. So I do want you to go back, and it forces you to think about it. Even though you're just taking a shot in the dark for your prediction, it does make you go back and think and figure out, was I correct or not? And also because that is part of the scientific process, right? You're supposed to have a prediction. By adding the prediction, technically I'm making that an experiment because you're testing an experiment, rather than just collecting data. Technically that makes it an experiment. So, and also when you think about it, it's kind of like free points. So Great question.
So, and then when we actually open the lab, it's loading right now. I did a little bit of it earlier, or just looked at it. Well, it wants to be slowed. It loaded fine earlier.
Well, now you're streaming, that'll slow it down.
Yeah. So when we do the lab, I'm going back and forth from the lab to the website. It says, for the starting population, choose a number between 0 to 10,000 for the actual starting population of plant A. When we go to choose those, I can see where plant A is on. We can turn it on or off. Mm-hmm. And then I can also see where okay. I just don't see where how do we run it? Well, so do we hit step or run there? Would it just be run?
It's been a while since I've actually run it. I think this should be the run button.
Okay, I see. So, and then you can see down below on the graph, one population will either increase or decrease, and you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then, okay, I get it now.
Okay.
I didn't get it at first. It was just how to do the website is what I didn't get at first.
Okay. Yeah. Then maybe since you've asked that, maybe if I get a chance, though it might be too late for you guys, maybe I'll make a video where I record the screen and show how to do that. So thank you for the input. And then on that note, before I let you go, this is, I guess, for people watching it too, some things to consider about the lab and biodiversity in general. And you're going to read about it, so I'm not going to go into detail, but basically the reason biodiversity is so important is think about those ecosystem services, right? They're important, one, for money, and two, just for survival. So we know that for an ecosystem to work, all the parts have to be working, right? All the little parts. And that's why biodiversity is important, is because you have all these different parts doing very specific little jobs. So every time you take away one that does a very specific little job, then you're reducing the ecosystem's capability to do whatever that ecosystem does. And I'll just use plants really quickly as an example. Some plants need a lot of light. Some plants need a little light. Some plants need complete shade. Some plants need a lot of water. Some need a little water. Some need sandy soil. Some need clay soil. Some need high pH soil, low pH soil. Some do high temperature, low temperature, high humidity, low humidity, all these things, right? So if you have a good biodiversity in a forest, you'll have all these plants that can take advantage of all these different environmental aspects, meaning that ecosystem is just doing what it does, right? Just providing those ecosystem services. But every time you take a piece away from that puzzle, it cannot take advantage of whatever it is that plant was taking advantage of, right? And that's just plants. Then consider the fact that once you get rid of that plant, then you affect all the different plants that also relied on that plant, and all the animals and fungi and all the things that related to that one plant. So that's why biodiversity is so important. I actually had a discussion with somebody in my family about that recently. And I like to use the term tree hugger. A lot of times when people think about biodiversity, they think of some tree hugger saying, oh, this is an important tree. It's been around for so many hundreds of years, and therefore we should give it intrinsic value. And I happen to agree with that. But that's not the big reason, right? The most important reason, going back to what I said earlier in this video, it's all about sustainability. So for us to be able to survive, we need thriving ecosystems. And for us to have thriving ecosystems, we need a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. So the more biodiverse things are, the better they are, and the less impact you'll have when you remove one species, right? So if you only have like 10 species in an ecosystem, if you remove one, you've just removed 10% of the ecosystem. That's a huge deal. So the more the merrier. And really quickly, the last two questions, they don't always miss this. Very often people miss this question. When I'm asking you what ecosystem you're in, get as specific as you want. But let me say this, you can't get too broad. So your two categories to choose from are not terrestrial or aquatic, right? That's just too simple. Yes, we're all on land. So yeah, get a little bit more specific than that, than terrestrial or aquatic. And then the other word, that's like the second to last question. The last question asks you to name one producer, one herbivore, one omnivore, and one predator. And for that, again, I'll ask you, don't be too broad. Like you don't need to have, for example, maple would be a good answer for a producer. You don't need to say red maple or sugar maple or silver maple, whatever. You don't need the genus. But a bad answer for a producer would be plant. Like, yeah, I get it, plant, but get a little bit more specific than that. Or tree, right? Try to get specific in doing that. So that's my advice for this week's lab. Any questions? You
Nope.
good? All right.
I'm good.
Well, we're in under an hour. So
right.
Thank you for sticking through it. For you, Austin, go ahead and send me an email just because I like to have a paper trail. Say, hey, just a reminder, I was there. Please apply my extra credit.
Well, I mean, I already kind of have that email, right, where we had this discussion.
Yeah. So just reply to that and say, hey.
Yeah, I mean, I will when it's probably like near the end of the semester because I have other points I have to go back and get to.
That's fine. Yeah.
I'm just waiting until I find out what I need them on the most.
There you go.
Okay.
That being said, for anybody watching the video, speaking of which, for anybody watching the video, email me too and say, hey, I watched the video. Give me like 3 sentences that show that you watched the video. Like tell me something that I said that you would not have known without watching the videos. And I was going to hang up, but Pac, you can go if you want. We have someone new here, so I might as well take the opportunity to answer any questions you might have. So,
alrighty, well, good luck.
Hey, thank you. All right, hello.
Hey,
So
I barely made it. I see.
Yeah, you came in right at the end. It's hard though because we all know what times it starts, but we never know what time it ends. So I guess
I thought I would check. I wasn't sure, and I was just checking my email, and it said today at 12:30, and I was like, oh, so I just clicked on it really quick.
That's all right. So I guess for the sake of the video, since we're recording, anybody watching this, just so you know, you could stop watching it now for the extra credit, or you can keep going because what I'm about to do now is, Elizabeth, I'll ask you some questions and I'll take your questions. So this is all extra for anybody watching the video. So did you have any specific questions about the discussion or the lab or anything in general?
No, I didn't actually. I just now watched the lab video that you did yesterday. And I did not know to do. I have just been going on and looking at, like, if you click on the grades and go under there and seeing the comments there, but I didn't even know that you could go in the lab and look that way.
Yeah, that's very handy. And it saves what I was speaking about this earlier. That saves me a lot of time. When everybody turns everything in on Sunday, my deadline, I have to have everything graded by Monday at noon. So when that happens, I just got to I don't have time to leave good feedback. So sometimes I just can leave an X and then highlight the part that was wrong. So yeah, that's why that video is handy. So I'm glad you learned. And that being said, since you and I have been emailing about this, if you can figure out, if you can do that with your phone, if that's possible, let me know. And if we can make a video showing how to do that, that would be great.
Okay. I can see what I didn't know until today. And I saw the video. I'm able to look where you go in their grades and you can see the comments there. I can do that on my phone. But like I said, literally 2 minutes ago is when I saw the video. And that's when I saw the email about the time for the discussion or for the video today. And that's when I just now clicked on it. So.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to go in my phone and check because I don't do a whole lot on my phone because I need more space, for things. And usually I don't have enough on my phone to do. So
I know what you mean.
No, yeah, that's good to know. I'll check on that and I'll let you know if I'm able to see that or not.
All right. For the discussion, do you happen to remember what your idea was last week, like for population growth, human population growth?
For the discussion, let's see, last week it was.
So I guess the question.
I don't remember. I have to go
That's
look.
okay. I'm trying to remember specifically how it was written. I think the question was, you're supposed to write to your senator and discuss whether you think the government should influence or not influence human population growth.
I know I wrote to influence it, and I don't remember it. Gosh, it might have had something to do with further education or contraceptives. I don't know. I remember the one that I replied to.
Oh, what was that one?
That was, about like mandatory birth control devices on people.
Okay. Yeah.
And I responded that I disagreed with that.
Yeah. I like that one. I mean,
Yeah.
not as an actual thing to do, because in my opinion, that would be a gross infringement of rights.
Yeah.
But for the sake of an academic discussion, it was good to throw. I like it when people throw out crazy ideas, at least for the sake of academic discussion. This is something I didn't mention earlier in the video, so this is good that you brought this up. Another thing I love about I shouldn't say horrible ideas, I'm sorry, because that's an opinion, and I don't like sharing opinions. But another good thing about having ideas that most people might consider horrible is that there might be some good aspect of that idea. For example, in my opinion, again, forcing people to do that, I don't think that's a good idea, me personally. But at least I could take that idea and focus in on, like, what are the good aspects of that? And the good aspects are, it would be good if people had access to birth control, right? And make it maybe more affordable, or maybe we should put money towards research to make it to where there's less side effects for women, whatever it may be. The idea here, the big idea is that you can take an idea that you might think is horrible, but then focus in on, like, what are the good parts of that?
Yeah. I think something like that, like the main idea is good. I do agree with population control somewhat because of our rapid growth, which that's been an issue for a while, but ways you go about doing it.
Yeah. And this brings up another good point. And I mentioned this earlier when I was talking to the other gentleman. It's not necessarily control, right? We're not necessarily talking about population control. Sometimes it does, some people did suggest that, but overall it doesn't have to be. It could just be influence. Yeah. For example, you could say, well, let's get rid of seatbelt laws. That's because seatbelt laws, that's an infringement on people's rights, and also it doesn't hurt me if no one's wearing their seatbelts. I mean, it does financially, probably with insurance rates, but the idea there is you could get rid of government intervention and reduce human population growth. And like I was telling Austin earlier, and since you're here, I'll repeat myself, and sorry if you're watching the video. Generally speaking, the United States of America does not have a human population growth problem. Our issue is not the number of humans we have. Generally speaking, we're doing pretty good. We're basically replacing the humans. Some die. The death rate is very close to the birth rate. So environmentally speaking, we're doing pretty good, especially West Virginia, right? Because West Virginia, we're actually losing people. And environmentally speaking, that is a good thing. Just environmentally, right? Obviously, that's bad for economics and many other things. But again, this is an environmental biology course, so we at least have to focus on the aspect of the environmental impacts, and then talk about the other things too. But that has to be, at least for this course, the central discussion. Now, if you were to take an environmental economics course, that would be a completely different story. Like, you would talk about, like, well, this is why we should do this for the environment, but also it's worth mentioning this thing about the environment, right? So, or I said that wrong, but I think you understand what I'm saying. For the lab, did you have any specific questions about the lab?
I didn't have any questions. I thought that was a really neat lab, actually, because I was kind of jolted about with the results on that.
Yeah, I was too when I first took it, because you don't expect that. I mentioned that earlier in the video too, was that, we live, I think most of us, we look around, you're probably very close to average looking around, right? Unless you probably don't have like a huge house compared to your neighbors, or a very small house compared to your neighbors, or a really fancy car compared to your neighbors, whatever. So you just feel like you're average, and you realize that in all actuality, most Americans are not average. Like
that's crazy, because I thought, okay, maybe a little bit more than average, but not, hugely. And mine was hugely, like.
Yeah. And one of your classmates mentioned in their lab, when they answered the questions, they think that the calculator may be skewed, right? It's just like giving you numbers to scare you. And I have no way of knowing that's true or not. And I would assume that might be true. But that being said, I don't think it's completely skewed, right? So I think, there is some truth to it. You don't have to go directly or take that with a grain of salt, I guess is what I'm saying. But the general message is still the same. And also that same student, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself if you're watching the video, but the same student mentioned the fact that it's not that accurate, that there could be more things to make it more accurate, more questions. And that's true. But then you're balancing convenience versus accuracy, right? So you could have many, many more questions that are much more detailed if you wanted a better, like more accurate answer.
Yeah, I was surprised there wasn't something about a little bit more about like, energy consumption. Like, I mean, of course there's, you can calculate the square footage of your home and your energy bills. Do you have gas? Do you have electric? Things like that.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised about that. I thought maybe there would be something in there about that, but there was not.
Yeah, again, and that goes back to the idea of the convenience versus accuracy, and it would be more accurate. Another thing, and I didn't mention this earlier in the video, so this is good. Another thing that website does not make obvious is that your location has a lot to do with your footprint too, because it's not just the resources that you use, it's also you are an average United States citizen. So we take the brunt of what the United States uses. Like when you talk about the infrastructure, right? Roads, or everything. Like our military, we use a lot of resources for our military, like literally physical resources, metal, fossil fuels, things like that. And because we all share in that, if that makes sense. So your footprint is a little bit inflated. It's not specifically you, it's you living in the United States.
Right.
That is taken into account. What else? There was one more thing that you jogged my memory, something I didn't say earlier in the video when we're talking about resources used. Oh, it's going to kill me. Oh, well. Do you have any questions? Maybe it'll jog my memory while you're asking.
I don't really have any questions as far as that goes.
Okay.
Just the comment about how shocking that was.
Oh, that's right. Okay. I get it now. I remember. So I love that question where it says, what are some other questions that should have been asked in the calculator? I liked them, and I had to address a few of them. One of those things, I love this one. Somebody put something like, well, what about your job? If we're talking about how many resources you use, specifically like fossil fuels, what if you're running a tractor all day, right?
Right.
You're a farmer. And that was a great point. But I had to tell them, and this is good to think about, that is accounted for on the consumer end. So when you talk about how much food you eat, then you're getting that share of the fossil fuels used in farming, not the person who's doing the farming. So I think that was it.
I was taken back a little bit about how it asked about the amount of meat that you eat.
Oh, have we? And that, I hate to say things are on autopilot. They're definitely not. But sometimes I get so caught up in the day-to-day aspect of the running of the course that I forget specifically what is mentioned in which parts of the book. So have we not talked about trophic level efficiency yet in the book, or at least have you gotten there yet?
I think we're there.
Maybe that might be this
I think we're there. I remember writing that down.
Okay. Well, that's the thing about the meat production is that you talk about trophic level efficiency. If you have 10,000 calories worth of plants, then when the animals eat them, like cows or whatever it is that we're going to eat, only 10% of that goes up. Like, so every time you take a step up the trophic level, you just lose all that energy. So that's why meat is so inefficient. And this is a good time to point out, just because it's inefficient, bad for the environment, doesn't mean I'm telling you or that the book is telling you not to do it. It's just the purpose of this course is to give you enough background knowledge so you can make your own informed decisions. So now you know that meat is generally not good for the environment. So quit it or not.
I didn't realize. I mean, I'm just thinking, that's, you think of like when you eat things that reproduce on their own, cows, chickens, things like that. And I'm a big meat eater. I do personal training for a living, and that's, I preach that to everyone. Lean meat, lean protein, fish, chicken, lean beef, so I'm like a meat advocate, and I didn't realize that it was such a big, huge, it was so inefficient.
Yeah. And that's just a great point too. And just when you're looking at the big picture here, you're learning all these things that are good and bad for the environment, and no one's saying don't do it. It's just everything comes at a cost. people, every time anything bad comes out about electric vehicles, you know, I've got a subset of friends who love to share it on Facebook. I guess no one's saying, I shouldn't say no one. Most people aren't saying that electric vehicles are perfect. They're just saying, hey, here's how they're better for the environment than this, but also here's how they're worse for the environment than that. You know, it's just, everything has pros and cons and costs and benefits, and these are all things that need to be accounted for so you can make your own informed decision. And that's what this course is about. And that's it. I don't have anything else if you don't.
Nope.
All right. I was just telling the last person that was on here, go ahead and email me, please, so I can have a paper trail, so to speak. Say, hey, I watched the video. Don't forget to apply my 5 points, and here's where I want them applied.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Have a great week.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.